Welcome to Redbeard Radio. I'm Brian Keith, and if you're in business and you're doing well, you're going to eventually have the problem of what do you do with the money you're making? Should you hire more staff? Should you buy more ads? Should you keep the money out of the business and put it somewhere else? And if you do decide to take a percentage of money out of the business and put it somewhere else, what should you do? Two of the most common things I see entrepreneurs in the 6 and 7 figures do is they're buying real estate. But what kind of real estate should you buy? Should you go long-term rentals? Should you go short-term rentals? Should you go long-term multifamily houses? What is best for you? Today, Shawn Moore is going to bring us the case for why short-term rentals are a great place for entrepreneurs to stack their cash. Shawn, welcome to Redbeard Radio.
Awesome, Brian. I appreciate you having me on.
I'm excited because I was once taking Stu McLaren's Tribe course, and Stu is one of the leading experts on membership sites in the world. Brilliant guy. And he was talking about his investment strategy. And I heard him talk about, how he invests some of his profits in long-term rentals and some in short-term rentals. And it's fascinating because close to every entrepreneur I've talked to, they 90% of them have the same, it's one or the other, right? And some of them are like, no, I only buy additional businesses. That exists. People who only do angel investing or only do whatever, that sort of thing. But almost everybody stacks their cash in houses. So I'd love to hear from you, Shawn. And my background is long-term rentals, single family. And there's a whole different world there with multifamily long-term rentals, and then a whole different world with the short-term vacation rentals. I'd love to hear your pitch on why short-term rentals are a great place to store your cash.
Yeah, awesome. And I appreciate that. And, I've been a full-time real estate investor for 23 years now and been around a lot of different asset classes, invested in a lot of different asset classes. And you will be hard-pressed to hear me talk about anything bad about any of them. I love real estate. I think it's a phenomenal vehicle for average everyday people to be able to build wealth long-term, specifically for entrepreneurs and high-income earners, for somewhere to be able to put their cash and watch it continue to grow versus just sitting in a bank. And so I love a lot of the different asset classes, multifamily, commercial, long-term rentals. I settled on short-term rentals personally about 16 years ago. I bought one of my first short-term rentals back in 2006 and really haven't looked back since. They check off a lot of boxes for us, but specifically as an entrepreneur myself, I've kind of always had that shiny object syndrome a little bit, where I'm always wanting to be able to have my hands involved in things and be able to, make an impact with whatever I've got my money into, specifically why most entrepreneurs like reinvesting in their businesses. And probably the best investment and the best return we ever get as an entrepreneur is doing that, is just continuing to reinvest in our business and in ourselves. But eventually we make money and we've got to, hopefully put it somewhere else to diversify a little bit. Short-term rentals are treated and act a little bit more like a business than other real estate asset classes. And that's why I particularly like them and why I was drawn to them 16 years ago. Now they're definitely the shiny object in the real estate world, kind of the shiny star of the hospitality game right now. Very much been a hot topic for a few years. But for us, they've checked the boxes for us as an investment for quite some time, way before they were popular, as popular and mainstream as they are now. And one of the biggest reasons I really enjoy them, Brian, is because I can put my business knowledge to work versus just being a passive investment particularly. And the reason we can do that is because we're selling an experience. We're selling a product that we have to worry about the customer journey and the customer experience and those things that we're used to doing as entrepreneurs. And if you can dial that into a real estate game like short-term rentals, you can really, accelerate your profits and accelerate your success with them. And that's the biggest reason I really like short-term rentals.
What is the level of involvement in the day-to-day management that is reasonable for entrepreneurs who are looking for a safe place to store cash? Should they go full out, hire an agency to handle all of it, or apply some of those business skills and be involved in the marketing, but not the operations, or what?
So personally, I'm a big proponent of full service property managers when you're building a portfolio. Now, what that means though is I'm not going to be involved in my day-to-day operations of the check-ins, check-outs, all of those different things. Where I get very involved is on the front end, on the acquisition, making sure we're buying the right properties in the right area. And then during that setup phase where we actually can put that creativity to be able to put together a very unique customer experience. From then, we expect our property managers to deliver that customer experience. And so I always tell entrepreneurs, busy professionals that we work with to plan on about 3 to 5 hours a week to be able to dedicate to that, especially during that acquisition and setup phase. Beyond that, I want these to be passive investments. I don't manage any of my own properties. I've been in this game for a long time. I know how to manage short-term rentals. We don't want to because they turn into a second job really, really quickly. It can really turn into a full-time job if you're managing these properties. So we get involved in developing that customer experience, putting everything together, and then we rely on our management company and our management partners to really help us deliver that customer experience.
So, how do you decide when it's time? So, here's what I'm thinking about. You could own one property and you could go take care of it yourself because you're just exploring. You want to understand all the details. But what's the minimum dose of number of properties you have to have before it really makes sense to hire that property manager?
I hire them on property number one, especially in the short-term rental game. Where you own long-term rentals, management of a long-term rental is much different than management of a short-term rental. You're dealing with check-ins, check-outs, guest communication on a regular basis. One property literally can turn into close to a full-time job if you're, especially if it's a profitable property, which is the goal for all of us, is to have high-producing assets. And so I suggest people get full-service property managers on property number one.
How do you decide where to buy? With LTRs, having it be where you can physically go and inspect things is most people do it that way. Once you get big enough, folks certainly go elsewhere and they start hiring property managers themselves. But for self-managed LTRs, it's within driving distances. Almost everyone does. Do you pursue that with STRs, or is it because you're hiring property managers from the outset, you're using your expertise to more identify those markets that in a year or three will be excellent places to own STRs?
Yeah, kind of the model that we teach and kind of the framework and path that we follow and run down. It doesn't really matter whether these properties are in our backyard or whether they're across the country, because we're going to set them up to be passive investments with the right property management team and partners in place. And so it really doesn't matter for us whether they're, again, in our backyard or across the country. I tell people there are a lot of really investable markets, but because we're developing a unique customer experience, and that's going to be a key part of your marketing and being able to attract people to your property, I always tell people to start in markets that they would enjoy owning a vacation home. Like I said, don't overcomplicate it in the beginning, because that you're going to serve yourself well in the end when you're marketing and setting up that unique experience. If this is actually an area that you enjoy, if it's a target audience that you understand, and then because then all of a sudden you're able to really maximize these assets, because there are good properties and bad properties in almost every market. And if you just invest for the investability of a market, all of a sudden, whatever the shiny object of today's market is, it's like musical chairs at the top anyways, right? Because the minute everybody goes there, acquisition prices go up, the revenue ratio between price that you're acquiring and then the money you're able to make on that asset, that ratio is going to not skew in your favor long term. And so if you actually understand how to maximize an asset in any market, and that's going to start with properties and areas and target audiences that you actually understand how to develop a unique experience for. So I tell people, forget about the numbers in the very beginning. The numbers are very, very important, and the underwriting is very important. So I don't want people to take this away from it, but start in areas that you understand and that you would love to own a vacation home, and then start to understand how to underwrite that area.
How much updating or maintenance stuff do you do from when you acquire property to when it is ready to go be ready as an STR? Are you looking for properties that need a lot of work so no one else wants them? Or are you looking for ones that are everything's been done so it's profit from 1 week after you get the keys, or somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, that I think goes down to your level of experience. If you have experience in adding value to a property and being able to look at a property and say, yes, I can see that this needs an uplift and everybody's ignoring it for these reasons, and I'm comfortable getting it from point A to point B, then I love value add properties, but I've been doing it for a long time. They're not for everyone, right? People watch fix and flip shows on TV all the time. And then you go into a fix and flip and you realize, holy crap, there's a lot more to this than I thought. The same is true when you're trying to buy an underperformer. And so sometimes it's better to start with a property that's already furnished and set up in a nice area and that has some upside long term, and you can hit the ground running a little bit sooner.
In your experience, how much cash does it take to actually get into the STR game?
Yeah, it's a great question because this is something that a lot of people don't think about. And I appreciate you asking it because there's really three things you need to budget for. And they're all based on a percentage of the acquisition cost in your area. So, one, most of us think about the down payment. You're going to have loan programs in that 10% down option, but anywhere from 10 to 20% down, depending on the loan product that you're going to be able to leverage when you're buying these properties. Then the second thing is your setup and furnishing cost. If you're buying a property that is unfurnished and it needs to be furnished in the short-term rental game, these properties need to be set up well, and I budget 10% of my acquisition costs to furnish and set up a property. So if I'm buying a $400,000 property, I need to set aside another $40,000 to get this property furnished and set up.
So the acquisition costs is the total purchase price, not the down payment.
Total purchase price, yes. Yep. So based on your total purchase price on the acquisition. And then that third piece is you're going to need a bit of a ramp up period. Short-term rentals typically take about 6 to 9 months before they really hit their full stride. And a lot of people don't plan on that 6 to 9 months. And they especially don't plan on that once you buy the property and you're going to get it furnished and set up, you're not making any money during that time. So those first few months, you need to be able to budget to pay those property expenses until that property starts to bring in some revenue and starts to generate revenue on its own. And again, give yourself conservatively 6 to 9 months. You're going to make some money during that 6 to 9 months, but you might not be covering the entire nut that you need to crack every single month when it comes to property expenses. And so those three things can add up, and you need to look at it and say, okay, I need my down payment, I need my furnishings and setup cost, and I also need to be able to get through that launch period in order for me to not be stressed out and putting myself into a situation where I might need to get out of this before I even start it.
So to use your numbers, if you were buying a house in a cheaper area where houses were only 200,000, you would need $60,000 of cash. And if you're buying in a more expensive area where everything's $1 million, you would need $300,000 of cash. Is that right?
Yes, that's a good rule of thumb to kind of go into this with. Now, there are always exceptions to the rule. If you buy a property that's fully furnished, right? You're not having to spend that entire 10% of your acquisition to set up and furnish a property. And so in a lot of these areas, a lot of properties are fully furnished, but you do need to have some sort of a budget to get it set up to deliver a unique experience, because most properties that are even sold furnished are going to need an uplift in that furnishings. And they're going to need to get accessorized, things like that.
They need my wife, who loves to design things.
Right.
And she's really good at saying, that should go there. This right here is not right. And whenever we're traveling and we're staying in B&Bs, she's always like, oh, that doesn't belong there, or they should have done this better. They just need to have that eye for design. What does someone do who they have the cash from their business? They know it's time to invest. They found the right market where the numbers work, but they don't have that eye for design. What do they do?
Yeah, well, you find a partner that does, right? You find somebody and hire. I'm a huge fan of hiring experts to help you along the way. And there are, interior designers are not all created equal. Let's say you don't have an eye for design, but, a designer that designs model homes is going to be different than a designer that understands the short-term rental game. And so they're out there. There's experts in every industry that you can reach out to and hire. And I'm a big believer that's the fastest way to success is to find those people that understand what you're trying to do. It's kind of that who, not how mentality of let's go find who knows how to do this, not how we're going to do it ourselves. Because a lot of times that school of hard knocks and learning it yourself can be long and expensive.
Now, did you start off with only STRs and stayed there, or did you start off with LTRs and then at some point decided the STRs were attractive enough to move your assets?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I actually started off in the fix and flip business I was for 6 years just doing fix and flips, and realized that I had nothing building passive income, right? I had a job fixing up houses. And so at that point, one of my old mentors put his arm around me and said, hey, you got to quit bragging about being a real estate investor, Shawn. You're not a real estate investor.
Ooh, harsh.
Oh yeah, my job out hit the floor. Old George, he really hurt my feelings back in the day, like just an ego punch, right? And said,
oh yeah,
you don't. And luckily, this was a lesson that was in my 20s, right? We're still young and doing this, and I thought I had arrived. And he said, you really can't refer to yourself as an investor unless you have assets that create passive income for you. And at that point, I thought, okay, he's right. As much as it hurt my feelings, I told my wife we were start building a portfolio of things that bring in passive income. And at that time, naturally, we did what a lot of people do, and we went to single family rentals. And in a 3-year period, we went and bought 52 single family rentals and just regular long-term rentals. And one of the biggest mistakes I ever made is I sold them after I had, I held them for about 3 to 5 years, had some nice equity and cashed out because I just didn't enjoy owning single family rentals. And I wasn't making a significant dent in my monthly, passive income take home pay. But at the time, I was still in my 20s, late 20s, early 30s when I ended up deciding I was going to sell these. And I said, I was still not quite, realizing what I was giving up and what I was getting rid of. And I probably still would have held those assets had I not just tried to cash out on all the equity. But then at that same time, it was in 2006, I bought my first short term rental. And I started to realize when everything started to tank in 2008, 9, 10, I had this cabin in Utah in a mountain lake property in Utah that was performing really, really well during one of the worst real estate times that we've, gone through. And what definitely one of the biggest, downturns that I had personally experienced. And it started to open my eyes in about 2010, 11. I started saying, man, this asset might be really good to look into. One, they're fun to own. We were using it the whole time. I was making more money than I'd ever made on any one single family home, long-term rental. And so that's what really opened our eyes. We kind of did it by accident and really realized during a downturn how they performed and opened my eyes to say, man, this is maybe a pretty viable asset. And at that point, we really started diving into them, and we haven't looked back since. And I actually haven't owned any long-term rentals since then.
That's fascinating, and it gets me thinking about asset management and how do you distribute between all the different ways to try to store your cash. We're recording this episode in February 2023, where inflation numbers are making the headlines every day, or they ought to be. And you think about people who store their cash in cash form, that if you go look up the math about if you worked your whole life making the median wage and stored all your savings in cash, what you would have at retirement. It's like enough to buy 2 bags of groceries.
Right.
Slightly overstated the case. So I really appreciate, Shawn, you giving us some insight into the short-term rental market. For people who want to go, who are intrigued and want to go pick your brain more and look at what you have to offer, where can they go find you?
Yeah, the easiest way, go check out Vodyssey.com, Vodyssey. And we've got a lot of free trainings on there. You can get a copy of my book. It's called What the Hell is a Lifestyle Asset? And it takes you through really all of the major steps in the acquisition, that setup and management, and the marketing of a successful short-term rental portfolio. And so I'd love people to start there just to kind of walk into this game with their eyes wide open a little bit and hopefully have some more questions along the way.
That's wonderful. Shawn, thanks for being on Redbeard Radio.
Absolutely, Brian. Thanks for having me.